Yeah, this lecture is going to be recorded for the YouTube channel, so stay tuned for that. So yeah, I'm Tammi. Most of you know me, those that are online and those that are in the room with us. But I am in my third year of my PhD, which I can't believe. And I'll be updating you on some of our developments that we have had from last field season and today when we were out in the field just on the university grounds as well. So, I do have a land acknowledgement, not as in-depth as Sean, but all of my research takes place on the Blackfoot Confederacy territory, and I'm grateful to the Blackfoot people and their traditional ways of knowing and caring for this land, as well as all Indigenous peoples whose presence continues to enrich our community. So I'll start off with some of my research objectives that to kind of give you a background of what I'm trying to do with my research. So our traditional ways of surveying in archaeology are normally through pedestrian survey, shovel testing, excavation, review of aerial imagery or satellite imagery. I want to move beyond these traditional ways and use other ways as well in conjunction with these to try and make some of these processes a little bit easier on us, because we all know that archaeology can be hard on the body. We have long days and things like that, and hopefully help us target areas in a different way as well. So I've been using an RPAS to do this. So RPAS is remotely piloted aircraft system, or a drone. But the literature likes to use fancy acronyms, so we'll go with that. I've been using a DJI Mavic Pro in my first year of flying, and then we moved to a DJI Enterprise 3T, which is capable of thermal imaging as well. So we've been using our remote sensing, what I'm trying to do as well, since the late 1800s, and I have a few cool pictures that I pulled up. This one is one of the first ones that was used at Stonehenge, and this was by Lieutenant P. Sharp from the Royal Engineers Balloon. And in this image, you can actually see some things that might not be visible necessarily as you're looking on the ground. So we've always been using these types of photographs to see from above, and or using ladders or other types of imaging or contraptions to stand above excavation units in some very awkward positions. There's also this one too that I know that everybody knows who Alfred Kidder is by now, hopefully from RQ 1000. But what you may not have known is Charles Lindbergh took this picture, and he was flying, he did this Pan American flight, and he was flying over the Gulf of, oh my gosh, what is it? I think it's a Gulf down in near Mesoamerica there, and Gulf of Ecuador. And he saw some of these weird mounds, and he contacted the Smithsonian and was like, I have these pictures from my plane. Do you think these are anything interesting? And then they put him in contact with Kidder. And then on his honeymoon with his wife, Anne, she was flying the plane and he was taking pictures. And this is one of the pictures from Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. And then they moved on to doing a lot of the Mesoamerican aerial photography from the early 1900s. But what am I going to try and do with thermal imaging is basically this nice drawing here. Everything puts off a different thermal signature depending on how they absorb energy and then emit the energy. So if you have a large concentration of artifacts on the ground, and I liken this picture to obsidian because obsidian's black most of the time. So I like to think of this as obsidian. It would absorb more energy from the sun and then eventually emit more energy as the day goes on. So it would have a different thermal signature compared to the vegetation and the soils around it. This can be the same for ditches or pits and earthworks, cultural depressions that we might find here on the plains or in other parts of Canada. We have pit houses in BC. These things might be visible with thermal imaging because as they fill in, the sedimentation is going to be slightly different than that around it. It could have a slight depression as well, which collects more moisture, giving off a different thermal signature than the sediment and the vegetation around. Well, what I'm interested in is these two here. Not subsurface architecture per se, but subsurface stone features that will give off different thermal signatures than the vegetation and the soils around it. And sometimes these features can have these little mounds that go with them. So depending on how the sun angles are, one side might absorb and emit more energy than the other side. So we'll look at some of those characteristics as well. So hopefully that wasn't too sciencey for everybody, but that's kind of what we're looking at. So I'm going to first talk about head smashed in buffalo jump, because there is a nice stone circle along the walking tour that's approximately 6 meters in diameter. This image was taken in July, and they keep it nicely mowed, so it's a nice visual representation with just the regular imaging, the RGB imaging, as well as in the thermal. So we took images in the early morning and the early afternoon in July to hopefully get a little bit of a contrast between the absorbing of the sun's energy and then the emitting of the sun's energy. So let's take a look at some of this. So right away, you can see our nice checkered target and the nice rock here that has, I think it was number 3. Was it number 3? Number 1 on there. And there's a few things that are really interesting. Not a lot of the stones in the morning are as visible. They show up as cool, but you can see the one side of the number 1 stone here is a little bit brighter than the other side. So there is the potential of it having more sunlight hitting it at that angle. It absorbs more and then it can emit more. But you can see some shadows here briefly, like lightly. And I do apologize for it to be cut off. The flights were the same for each of the flights, but the wind played a part in moving the drone side to side sometimes. It's even worse in the afternoon one because, of course, the wind picks up in the afternoon here. But you can see some of these shadows here that are kind of showing up. But this is morning. We got up, I think, at 5 o'clock on that morning, and we were out. We did 2 sites that day, so we were out at like 6 o'clock in the morning flying. So it was still relatively chilly in the morning, as it can be in even in July. So the rocks haven't had enough time to absorb the sun's energy to emit them as well. But in the afternoon, there are some things that are even more evident. You can actually see the outline of the number 1 right there. But the vegetation is a lot more brighter. It's absorbing and emitting that thermal energy at a higher rate than the stones. But then now you can actually see that contrast of the stones all the way around the ring. And again, sorry, it's cut off there, but I wanted to take the original images instead of making the mosaic on these ones because it was such a small area. So you can see now there's different, especially on this one, different parts of the stone are actually giving off different thermal signatures depending on how much it's absorbed and how much it's emitted. So that was cool. That's what we kind of expect to see on a surface feature. So then we decided to fly the drive lanes, and we were lucky enough to get permission to go up into the drive lanes from the landowners, as well as Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump. And these are just some of the outlines of where the drive lanes should be, right here and here. And then there's some other sites that are up on top of the cliff as well. This is the area we flew with the drone at 100 meters. We did it mid-morning in September. The reason why we couldn't do 2 flights is because Head Smashed In doesn't open early enough. So trying to get up to the cliff or up to the drive lanes is a little bit difficult to do at 6 o'clock in the morning. Hopefully we can rectify some of that this summer with the field school and we can get some good contrast flights. So I wasn't really expecting a lot from this because we could only get one thermal image because I was driving back to BC that day as well. It was kind of a flyby on my way back into BC, so we were only able to do the one flight, and it was mid-morning. I think this was around 9 or 10 that we took the flight. So this was the nice orthomosaic. You can see the satellite imaging is in the background, and it's got a lot more detail, but it's just not enough to see really anything that's going on. This is the thermal image. You can see some differences in some signatures. I'm going to zoom into this area right here because there's some interesting things going on there that we'll need to figure out in the future for some of the thermal imaging. But vegetation's giving off different thermal signatures. So the bushes compared to the grass, compared to the stones, they all should have different, as well as the pavement, the building. Again, it's earlier in the morning, so concrete and pavement and stuff like that will eventually heat up to a nice bright level on the thermal imaging. But at this point in time, it was still relatively early. It's fall, doesn't warm up quite as fast either. So it's still showing as relatively cool. So this is the area here that I wanted to show because there's a rock outcropping as well as some vegetation here on the ortho imaging. When we look at the thermal imaging, the rocks and the vegetation look almost the same with the thermal signatures here. So that's something that we're going to have to look at, and that's why we need that contrast flight in multiple times of the day. So we actually want to do it not just in the morning and then in the afternoon. We want to actually do it like 5 or 6 times throughout the day so we get a good representative thermal imaging out of the entire day. And then we can kind of merge all of those images together and get a thermal conversion on it and hopefully pick out some of these features. But it was really tough to see anything. It was a high flight on this. The cairns of the drive lanes are a lot smaller than stone circles, so they might be a little bit more difficult to pick up at such a high flying height. But we're going to do some more experiments this summer in conjunction with the field school. So that should be very neat to be able to be part of that and hopefully update mapping that was done in the 80s, 60s, 40s, all those years. So, but what is really interesting about the thermal imaging from last summer is at a different site near Pincher Creek, DJPL 192. It's located on private property. The landowner had contacted Rachel 6 years ago, she told me. Yeah, 6 years ago. She says, well, my grandson was in grade 2 and now he's in like, yeah, 2019. Because she had some rings on her land that she was curious about because they also have some artifacts they'd found as well. So Southern Alberta is known for the stone features, stone circles, habitation, hearths, cairns as well, just to name a few. At DGPL 192, the landowner's father had a relationship with the neighboring Blackfoot communities as well. And through discussions with them, the Blackfoot community had expressed that this is possibly a summer camp of the Blackfoot. In conjunction with some of the artifacts that have been found there, it's reasonable to assume that there's that potential, right? So there's lots of different projectile points that were found here. Rachel and crew have kindly analyzed them all, but we have basalt, bracken, oxbow, corner notch, general middle prehistoric projectile points. So this could be a relative occupation date from 7500 BP to 1800s where a metal trade point has been identified on the property as well. So there is no radiocarbon or no absolute dates. So that 7500 could be, may not be, but for the relative chronology, that's what we have so far. Last year's, or not last year's, because last year is what I'm showing you today, but in 2022, this is what we did with the first drone that we had. It was a DJI Mavic Pro. It was not the latest and greatest on the market at that point in time. It was actually quite old because there was the DJI Mavic Pro 2. That was the newest one at that point in time. But we went out and we tested it and we flew just with RGB imagery. We weren't able to do, it's not capable of doing any other surveys. There's no thermal, nothing on it. So we ended up going in September again. It was pretty smoky and overcast, not the best flying conditions, but it did still come up with some pretty cool orthomosaics and the corresponding digital service models here that shows us the elevation changes. So this area has two different elevations. There's like a lower terrace along the Pincher Creek, which you can see here, and then there's like a kind of an upper terrace as well. So this one was the lower one, and what was not shown in the ortho, we can see some diagonal lines going across here. The landowner said that they haven't really done anything agriculturally in there, but it does look like this possibly could have been hayed, and that was, you know, the tracks from tractors and the haying equipment, but no seeding has been on this. So potentially those, if there was rings or circles on that lower, they might be gone now. But on the upper, this is just a small portion because this drone had troubles doing large areas in short periods of time. So we kind of had to like just pick an area. And then it just shows that this is down to the lower part. There is some disturbances here as well as here that you can see in both images as well. And those will come into play once I show you some of the additional flights with the thermal drone. So when we were out there, the landowner did try and point out some circular features, but this was not necessarily in the drought conditions that we had last year. The grass was tall, even in September. So we really couldn't see anything either on the orthos, the digital surface models, or on the ground when we were walking around. So we were like, ugh, that was a fail. What do we do? Well, we decided to get a new drone and we went out again. We did some flights in June as well, but the best results came from the July flights. So we did early morning again. This was our second site that we did with the head smashed in circle. Early morning and afternoon flights. We did a 30-meter flying height, which gave us a ground sampling distance that was really great for like high spatial resolution, 1.15 centimeters for the ortho, 4.66 centimeters for the thermal. And then even at the 100-meter flying height, there's still really good spatial resolution for both. Considering when you are walking around with your GPS, you're lucky to get a meter accuracy on that. So it's kind of relative to that. So this is just me walking along, setting up our targets here that we saw in the head smashed in images as well. And the great thing about the 3T is that our regular photographs and our thermal photographs were taken at the same time, so we only had to do one flight for both. So this is the entire pasture area that we took in one flight. So this is that lower area here, and then that other corner that I took here, but then you can see there's a whole other area right here. This is the 100-meter. It took us about half an hour to do the flight, which was great because we could do a lot of flights in a day if we wanted to and cover a lot of area at the 100-meter. Other things to note, this is a beehive area right here. Again, the Pincher Creek just following down there. And then there's those two disturbances and that little dip in between. The weather was relatively good. It was 10 degrees in the morning and 23 degrees in the afternoon, which will make that good difference for that thermal conversion there and the difference between the morning and the afternoon flights. This is what our digital service model looked like. You can still see the kind of diagonal striations on there. You can see the disturbances and things like that. Not really necessary for this project, but it's still really cool that all of this gets made all together all at once. I just really have to feed all the photos into the program and it just outputs all of this stuff for me, which is awesome. So this is the morning orthomosaic, or thermomosaic. Really can see some of those disturbances being like super highlighted in here. And I like to point this one out because that's a dip there where there's a lot more moisture, even with the drought conditions, there's a lot more moisture content in that dip, making it cooler. And that sediment slightly different than those around it. And then you can see that disturbance here kind of showing the same thing. And then with the sun angles, some areas might be showing up as warmer. The afternoon, we can kind of see an evening out of everything as things have absorbed the solar energy and now they're starting to emit it at a higher rate. You can still see those disturbances, but it's not as quite as pronounced. So what did I do with this? Well, I looked at every square inch of these images, all of them, ortho, morning thermal, and afternoon thermal, to see if there was anything that was of interest. Because when it's zoomed out like this, not a lot's visible, so I had to zoom in and start looking. So where I zoomed in, where I'm going to zoom in for everyone here is by the beehive and that ditch. So this is the nice, so brown, so brown and crunchy out there that I swear if anybody dropped anything flammable that it would just go poof. But in this image, there is some concentrations of circles that have come up. These are just a couple of them. When we move to the morning, those are the ones that we saw on the ortho, but then we start seeing more come up with the morning. But what's interesting, and this is why we need to fly at multiple times during the day, is these are what we kind of saw here, but then in the afternoon, there was a few more that showed up there. Now, these are all buried, potentially buried circles. I don't want to say that they are because we don't know. They show up as these signatures on the thermal imaging and you see them in the RGB orthomosaic as well, but those were special conditions. Like I don't think you would see it if this was supposed to be at the end of the rainy season. The grass should be really, really super tall and green and lush. I don't know if you would have been able to see on the just the regular photo orthomosaic, the circle outlines as well. So hopefully this year, when we do some flying, we might get a little bit more vegetation growth and we can see if that's actually the case. So now what am I gonna do with that? Well, I wanted to look at the 30-meter flying height to see if you can see more detail or if anything different comes up. This is by the gravel road. The gate to the property is right here. Our car's parked right here. I only use this. I moved from the different area because I didn't get the 30-meter flying height over by the beehive because the 30-meter takes a lot more pictures. It takes a lot longer to fly. So we only did a small area along a strip along the road. This is the 100-meter orthomosaic. This is the 30-meter orthomosaic. And even though, like I said, this is a really good spatial resolution, I actually do like this one better because it takes away the noise and makes it a little bit more smooth for visual representation. And you can actually see the targets, very, very small, but you can see the targets in the 30-meter. They're like all intermingled with like pixel noise basically on that. So for the orthomosaic, we determined that lower flying heights may not be the best. even though they have the better spatial resolution. This is the 100 meter morning orthomosaic. You can see a circle there. In the 30 meter orthomosaic, you can see the same circle there. It's a little bit more detail. I actually don't mind the 30 meter thermal imaging compared to the 100 meter thermal imaging, just because the thermal imaging has a different spatial resolution than the RGB photography. So you can see here that it's a 4.66. So that's kind of similar to the RGB ground sampling distance. So a lot of things that we still are working out for the best spatial resolution on it. But honestly, the 100 meter covers a large area. You still get to pick up some of these features. So if you're kind of more pressed for time and you don't want 10,000 pictures to process, then maybe the 100 meter might be the better idea to do that. But we're gonna figure out a best practice for that as well by the end of this field season, hopefully. So I had a chance to go back out there after we flew the drive lanes on my way home to BC to see what this was on the ground, like if we could see this on the ground visually. Because like I said, in 2022, we couldn't see any of these circles on the ground. The grass was tall. It was just very difficult to differentiate this. So I'm gonna move again to this area where we looked at this circular feature. I had these thermal mosaics loaded on my phone because they have georeferencing on them. So I just used a georeferencing map program that I could just walk to one of these circles and look at it on the ground. And this is what it looked like on the ground. So it looks like grass, but there is a slight difference right there. And it's shorter grass that's growing, which in archaeological textbooks, and as you would learn as a student, that if there's anything buried underneath, an archaeological feature that's buried underneath, it can inhibit vegetation growth. So again, that's kind of hypothesizing. We're not there quite yet to prove it, but hopefully this summer we can get out there and excavate. University test site. We were out there today, so I just wanted to throw this in there. The university test site kind of sounds a little sad. So taking suggestions for fun names, if anybody has any. But we went out and mapped it today because Ken has some cool equipment that we were able to use to map out some of these features. So what is a test site? It's something that I built on the university grounds to test out all of these hypotheticals that I just talked about in this presentation. So in 2022, or 2023, yeah, 2023, last year, we took Ken's CRM class out there and built this site, and then we tried to map it, but we had some technical difficulties. So this year we went out and mapped it fully. The black dots are hypothetical site boundary. The green blobs represent stone circles, except for this one. This one is our rock pile that we just wanted to map out. We have lots of rocks. We can build some more things if we want to. Then we have 3 hearth-like features here, and then drive lane type cairns coming off here. And then there was 3 pretty large glacial rocks that we mapped in as well, just in case those become important in the future as it's being used by the university for classes to come. So I buried 1 stone circle, partially buried another, and then left 1 fully on the surface. Same with the hearth features. And I did that in September as well, and we went back out there, and it was really difficult to see actually what I'd done just in the past September. But we're going to be doing a lot of the contrast lights on this to see if everything matches up, because we do want to validate the data. because it doesn't really mean anything unless it's validated. So that's what the test site will do. So I'm pretty happy with how we did that today. I don't have any flights of it from this year. I do have some flights of it when it was first built and everything was on the surface, but that is to come in the next month or so as we move forward with this year's field season. So I hope to present on that eventually soon too. So where does this all lead me? We're working with the landowner to do a partial excavation of one of the circles at DGPL 192. She's very excited about it, but she's worried that if too many people are on her land, it'll be a little bit unmanageable. So we're gonna keep the volunteering to a minimum at this point in time until she's okay with the numbers that I give her. So that's TBD. But we want to do a full survey, pedestrian survey of the area as well, and do some digging. But she doesn't want a lot of digging done because she has cows that go in that field as well, and it can just cause some headaches for her. So we're going to try and keep it as minimal as possible. I talked to the government, and they suggested just excavating just a corner, like a quarter of the circular feature, and that if we do hit the rocks and it's, you know, like a real circular or real stone feature, then they'll be okay with just having that one corner excavated. The reason why she approached for this that she told me, I'm not sure if she told Rachel this as well, but Highway 3 is being expanded and it could affect some of these features, and her dad really wanted to keep this field as native as possible, native prairie. So she really wants to protect that for her dad's legacy. So yeah, there might be a lot of work coming up at DJPL too, but there might not be. So stay tuned for that. At Head Smash and Buffalo Jump, we want to get to the drive lanes, and new news as of today, we are getting a multispectral drone as well that may help with that vegetation versus stone thermal image where everything looks the same, because the multispectral is used for vegetation indices. So stone won't show up on those. And then we could potentially, well, they'll show up, but it'll have a different than the vegetation, significantly different than the vegetation. So that will be something that's really cool that we're going to try and do. And then maybe fly the cliff face, because potentially multispectral could reveal rock art as well, which is kind of cool. For the thermal, we want to do that contrast ratio and convert the photographs into actual temperature values, because the 3T actually doesn't store the temperature values in the photograph. So we've got to do a little bit of work on that. We want to do some temporal resolution, which means flying at many different times of the day. And then that spatial resolution, determining what flying height makes too much noise and what flying height makes everything too blurry. And then everywhere in between to make sure that we are getting the best visual representation of this data. So that's it. I know it's a little bit shorter than normal presentations, but I felt like that was already a lot of information to throw at you all. My acknowledgements are my committee, Greg, Sean, and Chris from the Department of Geography, University of Lethbridge for that awesome test site. Using that awesome test site, the Archaeological Society of Alberta, Diane, who is the landowner, and my tax with ASA helps me fund this project, which has been super fun so far. And I've enjoyed sharing it with you all. So if you have any questions, those are some references of the photos. Nobody wants to see that. I saw you.
Obviously, you got temporal.
Yeah.
Are you expecting to find a lot?
Yeah, I think that I think the stones are gonna, compared to like the vegetation, which could cool down at a quicker rate in the evening. I'm hoping that'll like almost shine like a beacon. But yeah, we're gonna do some dusk flights and some maybe slightly darker. We don't want to go too dark because, yeah. Actually, no. There is no restrictions of night flights because there are lights on the drone. It's just like an airplane, and when you see it flying in, like taking off and whatever, and there's all these flashing lights, the drone does the same thing. So there is no restrictions with the licensing that Transport Canada has to do night flight. But it's a little bit scarier because I wouldn't want to crash it at night, right? Because then you would find it maybe potentially. So yeah. Yeah, dusk I think will be good enough. And then maybe twilight, a little bit further into twilight. Yeah. This dusk is still pretty light. If you hit it right when the sun just is off the horizon, it's still pretty light. But then if you wait a little bit longer, then it gets a little bit darker. So that might be a good time to fly as well. Depends on if Diane will let us on her property that late too. That's another factor. And then head smashed into it. There's restrictions elsewhere than the drone flying. Yeah. Any other questions? Anybody online? So a lot of work still yet to do. Hopefully we can get it all done in the 3 to 4 weeks that we're at Head Smashed In. 4 weeks, I guess, at Head Smashed In, and then kind of Diane's not very far from Head Smashed In, so it's a really, really neat, nice that they're so close that if we're excavating one day, we can fly at Head Smashed In the next day or vice versa. So, but we want to make the excavations quite quick for her as well, and as little disturbance as possible to her life. Can you imagine like 50 people converging on her land, being like, "I'm here to excavate"? She'd probably not really appreciate that. So, but.
So with the stone circle, you section it, you sort of like a wedge, basically get like one corner. Is the idea that you fly it at different sort of like you bring everything sort of down horizontally continuously, do the flyovers for each sort of arbitrary level of traffic there just to get that imagery all the time?
Yeah.
Or would you just sort of you leave the drone sort of in flight? Like how does the logistics of that? You sort of like everybody like excavate down, 10 centimeters, pause, and then put up a drone.
That's something that I am going to discuss with Sean. Hopefully, I have some ideas because yeah, I would like to open up all of the blocks and excavate them down, but we know that logistically excavating, 9 units at the same time all the way down might be a little bit difficult, but we do want to do flights as we're going to get that 3D kind of image of the excavation as it's going as well. As we want to get that overview shot of the excavation block to show, we can change the view of the camera as well. So we could actually maybe get full wall images as well of stratigraphy and things like that. So it's more than just the thermal that we're going to be looking at for that, but we can use it for an archaeological piece as well. And the government has also said that using the drone to do the plan views of these circular features, because there are a few on the surface that we found, that we can use the drone to do that instead of TP quicking or things like that, just to see how that works as well. So they've been really open with some of those methods for mapping out features as well. So something to keep in mind for future as well. But I mean, I'm not opposed to using the TP Quick for those surface features either. And it might be something that we could use in conjunction with the students to teach them how to do that as well. Yeah, exactly. And then we can have both, we can actually compare the two. Right? It's always good to compare. But yeah, so there's going to be a lot of logistics that we're hoping to plan a lot of it out this week, so that we're prepared to just go running, basically. It's going to be a wild and furiously fast field season. But it'll be fun. It'll be fun. So, yeah. Sean can answer.
On weekends and then 4 weeks straight.
So if anybody didn't hear that, May long weekend is when the Head Smashed in Field School starts for 4 weeks. Yeah, do visit. Yeah. I'll be running around. I won't be with you guys much, but yeah, we should get walkie-talkies though. We'll be like, hey, Sean, this is what I'm doing. Yeah, we should do walkie-talkies. Yes, there are bears up. But I'll show you the way. Yeah. Actually, in some of the images, just kind of as a fun aside, there was warm bodies in some of the thermal images of Head Smashed In. So coyotes, deer, they show up as like little oblong shaped things on the thermal imaging. It was like, what are these like bright white dots on here? And it was, yeah, because we saw a lot of wildlife as we were flying as well. And marmots. Yeah, oh, maybe it was marmots too. I thought maybe it might have been a rabbit because there was one like right in the bush. I was like, why does the bush have like a bright white oval? I couldn't figure it out, but that could be a marmot hiding. So yeah. Oh yeah, we did. We had a coyote in the test site this morning. And that was at like 9 o'clock this morning that we were out there, and the coyote was just like hanging out. So yeah.